Okay, good morning, everybody. Delighted to have you here with us this morning. My name is Fergus Dolan. I work for NALA, the National Adult Literacy Agency. Delighted to have you here for our webinar on creating a mindful classroom, understanding learning behaviour, a role in teacher-learner interactions, and using effective teaching methods. And we're delighted to have Dipankar Biswas, who's an adult tutor with Limerick and Clare ETP to facilitate. So just if you've joined in the last minute or two, Dipankar will present for 20 or 30 or 40 minutes, and then hopefully at the end we'll have 10 or 15 minutes questions and answers. And we are encouraging you to type in your questions or your comments or your ideas into the question stroke chat box. And I'll come back on at the end and read out your comments, your questions. So over to you, Dipankar, and all the best.
Right, thank you, Fergus, and hello, everybody. You're very welcome to this webinar. I'm delighted to be here. Like Fergus said, please type in your questions if you have any. We should take about 40-45 minutes at the most, I think. I hope you'll bear with me if we overshoot a little bit. I'll try to stay within the time. So today's presentation will be on creating a mindful classroom. In this, we'll see how we can understand learners' behavior and our role in the teacher-learner interaction, and how we can use effective teaching methods that can help to engage all learners. Sorry now. Okay, so we'll look at 4 areas in this, the 4 areas of learner engagement. So this will give us an idea or understanding of the physiological basis of learning, so that occurs in the brain, in the human brain, and what are the factors that impact on our brain's ability to engage with learning and absorb and retain information. We'll also look at how our ability to regulate emotion is affected by early life experiences, and how this can decide on the effectivity of our brain's capacity to learn. And also we'll look at some ways to regulate emotions and overcome these obstacles of dysregulation. So this way we'll overcome the obstacles that engage our learners in the learning process. So these are the 4 areas we'll hopefully cover, and this should give us an idea of how we can create a mindful classroom. Okay. I know you can see me and I can't see myself or yourselves, so it's a bit weird. It's like I'm talking to a screen, and I don't do this very often, so I'm not used to this fully, but I'll give it my best shot, so please bear with me. So in the first section, we'll look at the learning brain. And in this, we'll look at a few different things. We'll look at the neural pathways of learning. So this is the hardware of the learning process, and how the brain hierarchy impacts on our availability or ability to learn. And we'll look at a neurosequential model of education that was suggested by Dr. Bruce Perry, which kind of again is a way of engaging learners so that they are present to our instructions. So the first thing, the brain cells and the connection. So this is the hardware. So on the left, you'll see an image of a neuron. So these are specialized cells that are present only in the brains, and you don't see these anywhere else. So there are some interesting things to know about these kind of cells, is that they are formed at birth. So we are born with all the neurons that we'll ever have at the time of birth. So there's an explosion of brain growth at the last term of pregnancy. Once the head is formed and the brain, the neural cells starts to form in the start. So thousands and thousands of cells are produced every day in the last term, and we get all our brain cells that we're born with at that time. So they're fixed number that do not divide. We get about 80 to 100 billion nerve cells at the time of birth, and from then on, it is either we use it and we keep them all there, or we lose it by not using them. So these cells are specialized because you can see they're branched unlike any other animal cell that we are we would have studied in school, perhaps, that these cells are highly branched. And as you can see, the branches enable them to connect with neighboring neurons. So these are the most connected cells in the world, in the universe. Each cell can connect with up to 1,000 other neighboring cells. So that's the capacity. Whereas in the other somatic cells of our body, say each cell would be connected to about 6 or 7 or at the most 8 neighboring cells, whereas these cells can connect with these branchings with up to 100 connections with, 100, did I say 1,000? 100 connections with neighboring neurons. So what happens is these neurons are, I won't go into brain physiology and brain function and all that, but in terms of how they impact on learning, I'll just concentrate or focus on that bit. So you can see on the right is two nerve cells that are connected to each other. So most of the communication within the brain between the nerve cells happen through chemicals or neurochemicals. And these nerve cells that wire together the nerve cells that are used most, we call them firing together. So the signal is transmitted from one cell to another. Sorry, I'll just use I'm not sure if using a pencil here. So a pen, I might use that. So as you can see, this cell is connected to this cell at this moment in this picture, and these two are connected through this neural, the extension, it's called an axon. So these two cells, they connect with each other, and if they connect very often, then what happens is a coating forms on them called myelin. So this process is called myelination. What this effectively does is it's like insulation on a cable. So it makes sure that the signals transfer between these two cells very, very efficiently and very quickly. Now, myelination can only happen if the pathway of a signal happens over and over and over repeatedly. So that is why they say that neurons that fire together wire together. Now, the neuron connections are happening and breaking all the time in a healthy brain. So this is a normal process. So they connect, and they don't physically connect, as you can see where this circle part here, which is called a synapse. One of the axon tips or one of the extensions of one cell connects or touches the dendrites or the extension of a neighboring cell, and it's not a physical connection, it's an electrochemical connection, as in it gets very close to each other and there's an exchange of chemicals between these two parts, and then when the signal is passed, the chemicals stop production and they kind of detach or move away from each other. So it's highly this process is highly temporary. But these two cells will stay close together and the connection will become stronger and the myelination will happen if if the signal is transferring all the time. So what this basically means is that when we do something repeatedly, all these actions are taking place because of our brain cells working, and those actions that happen more often, we remember, it forms stronger memories. So this is important in forming memories. Just like you driving to work every day, use the same car and you go on the same route and the same road. So it becomes a memory. You don't need to think about where you're driving to and how you're getting to work. It happens automatically. So this so this happens because we do it repeatedly. So why this is important is what the connections that are made early in our lives, say the first 3 or 4 years of our lives, all the brain cells, all the neural networks that are formed in the earlier years of our life, they're important for future learning because they determine how we receive information or can or cannot receive information. Although there is hope because there's something called as brain plasticity, which was discovered. And so even at a later age, we can still learn our brain connections. New connections can still be formed, but they're not as easy to form or not as effective as those formed in the earlier days of our lives. Okay, we'll move on to the next. Okay, so here we'll look at how the brain works in terms of its hierarchy. So there are different regions of the brain that does different things. Sorry, my markings from previous slide is still here. So I think I won't bother doing the markings. So our brain can, it's called, there's one model of the brain. I know the brain is divided into the left and the right hemisphere and the cerebrum and the cerebellum and the medulla oblongata and all that. But in terms of, again, behavior and learning, we can divide that into three regions. The first, or the most primitive, being the brain stem, or which is also called as the reptile brain. In this part of the brain, which is essential, which is also called as the survival brain, this part of the brain regulates our breathing, our digestion, our appetite, and other automatic functions, heartbeat, and all that, which we have no control over. And this then leads to the second region, which is called the middle brain. And in this is called the limbic. In this part of the brain, it deals with emotions. So this is also called as the limbic system. So the medulla oblongata, and the amygdala, and the hippocampus are all located in this part of the brain. And this is where memories are stored, long-term memories are stored in the middle brain. And then on the top, we have the new brain, or the neocortex. This contains the cerebrum in the front and the cerebellum at the back. So this performs all the other functions of vision and speech and sight and all that. And also the new part of the brain, the neocortex, the front of the brain, which is also called the prefrontal cortex. That is where all the higher order thinkings happen. And this is the part of the brain that helps us in executive functions of thoughts and giving meaning to things and rationalizing and being logical and all that. And this is the part of the brain that has the capacity to think about itself. So this part of our brain lets us think about thinking. Which is something that only higher mammals can do, and the lower organisms are not able, do not have that capacity. Now, why I'm showing you this structure is it's important in terms of how the brain produces a reaction. So the first impulses to the brain comes from the brain stem, so which is the primitive part of the brain. And from there, the response travels to the emotional part of the brain. So the survival part of the brain, when it gets a response, it evaluates it in terms of whether this particular response or this situation is a threat to survival or not. And then it goes to the middle brain, which is which produces an emotional response. So we react to whatever the stimulus that comes to us from the environment. And finally, the new part of the brain, or the frontal cortex, neocortex, gets a chance to analyze this information that's coming from the environment and make a decision based on that. So it is kind of the last part of the brain. The thinking brain is the last part of the brain to come into action. So before the thinking brain has come in, our body has already produced a survival response and also an emotional response. Now this happens very quickly in microseconds, and so there's not much of a distinction, but that's the sequence of information. That's the sequence in which the brain receives information and then produces a response. Okay. Now, again, why this is important, again, is we all know that only when we feel safe and when we feel comfortable, that we are able to learn. So when we face a threat, our learning brain is switched off, and we can't use the information that's coming at us to make any effective changes in our behavior, because we are in an emotional or a survival mode. Okay. The next slide brings us to the neurosequential model of education. So this is a model of education that was developed from this neurosequential model of the brain was first of all proposed by Dr. Bruce Perry, who is kind of a scientist, brain scientist, and he said he used the triune version of the brain to say that our brain is divided into sections. So here you can see the brain stem, which is at the bottom, and this regulates blood pressure, heart, body temperature, and all that, sleep. So we have no control over this. And then is the cerebellum, which controls some of the other functions of balance and sleep, appetite, and all that. So this is partly in our control. We can affect it. and then is the limbic system, which is the emotional part of the system. So this gives rise to emotional reactivity and attachment and all that. And then in the cortex is which is affected by, and the cortex is the highest part of the brain, which then produces concrete thoughts and abstract thoughts, and based on rewards and punishment it operates. So this system is useful in that this part of this system, what happens is the formation of this brain model, or the formation of this brain, is affected, I told you, in the first 4 years of our life. So what happens there sets the template. So in the early parts of our lives, when we have different experiences in relation to others, our brains kind of look at the world in through its own lens. So we all look at the world with our own personal lens, and this is determined by the development of our brain in the early stages of our life. So the attachment figures that were present for us, and how we learn to react or respond to the environment around us. This is not pertinent to adult learners directly, but it is good to know that if they are in a certain way, their learning styles and their ability to connect or take in information would be affected by their early previous experiences in life. So any trauma that occurs in the early phases of our life when the brain is developing, so at this development phase, it has the most profound impact on our further abilities to learn and to engage with others, and for everything else. Our whole perspective or the view of the world is determined by how our brain is shaped in the first few years of our life. So any trauma at that stage, development trauma, will lead to a greater impact in later life. Okay, so right. So that was the hardware, the structure of the brain, and let's look at the next part as to what affects our capacity for learning. So our capacity for learning is influenced by our brain's ability to pay attention, to receive and retain information, and make decisions based on all those informations. So these functions, they are affected when the brain has experienced trauma, especially in the formative years of life. So this leads to what is called as a window of tolerance, and we'll look at that in a little more detail. The window of tolerance is our ability to stay in the present and pay attention to what's going on. So that is our window of tolerance. So that the size of our window of tolerance is determined by how healthy our brain is. So it is smaller in people with early trauma, who have faced traumatized people, not just early trauma, any kind of trauma. So they have a smaller window of tolerance, and therefore a lot of the time such people have a fear response to everything. So instead of a balanced response to stimulus, it's always mostly primed for fear, and which gives rise to the flight, fight, or freeze response. So this kind of brains, traumatized brains, are usually they're wired for protection rather than connection. And we know that learning can happen only through a connection, through a relationship with the learner and between the learner and the teacher. So let's look at a little more details about this. So here is a picture of how trauma can affect the brain. So as you can see on the left, there is a brain scan of a healthy brain beside one that has suffered from toxic stress. So toxic stress is prolonged stress. So that can lead to traumatization. So you see the red parts of the brain are the red parts of the image are those that are active. So in the healthy brain, you'll see there are a lot of healthy regions, active regions in the brain. So these are the parts that are reacting and responding and are available for learning, and they're tuned in for receiving information from the outside world. Whereas on the right is the toxic brain that has undergone toxic stress, and it has very few parts that are red, which means that are red or yellow. So they are the active parts of the brain. So the darker parts are the inactive parts of the brain. And in a lot of cases, when there is extreme and prolonged stress, a lot of the brain parts the brain cells can actually die. So when they die, so they appear as black, and those parts of the brain that have no living neurons in them, they perform no function at all. So when they die, they can actually reduce, the brain size can actually be reduced. So as you can see on the slide, the picture on the right, so there is two brain images of a normal 3-year-old and a 3-year-old that has suffered from extreme neglect. And you can see immediately from the size of the brain, and these are proportional figures, so they have not been reduced. So you can see that the brain size of a child that has undergone extreme neglect is actually smaller than that of a child who has had a normal upbringing. So obviously with a smaller brain, you have every other function is reduced. Its capacity to learn, especially, has been reduced. So this is how trauma can physically affect the brain in terms of its size and function. So this is the window of tolerance that I was talking to you about. So in the middle, you see the window of tolerance in yellow, the yellow box. So this is where we are relaxed and we have a calm state of mind, we're balanced, we feel in control of everything that's happening. So we are in a zone there that is, our brain functions optimally and effectively, and we are able to deal with whatever comes, whatever we encounter in our life. What happens is this window of tolerance, the size of this can, even within healthy individuals, can increase or decrease based on how we're feeling at the moment. So stress is the biggest contributor to the size of the window of tolerance. So when we are under stress, our window of tolerance shrinks. So imagine yourself in a stressful situation, and you'll know that you're not able to think properly. So say, for example, you're getting out of the door to go to work, and suddenly you find that your car has a flat tire, or you can't find the keys, or one of the children has forgotten where they kept their homework, and at the last moment, so we get stressed. So what happens then is we start to feel under pressure, our heartbeat goes up, our body becomes tense, and we lose our tempers. So that is because our window of tolerance has shrunk. So we find every stimulus, everything that's happening too much, and our brain is not able to deal with these events that's happening. What happens is when we go too high out of the window of tolerance, when you go out of it, so the two responses can happen. One is the hyperarousal response, where we get too extremely hyperaroused. So this leads to dysregulation. What happens is this dysregulation, we are, like I said, one of them is our heartbeat increases, and we get anxious, we get angry, and then we explode. So we can burst out and then in children we can see this as a fight or flight response, or even as adults, we feel like throwing something or punching somebody or screaming and shouting, raise our voice. So that's a hyper-aroused state. The other form of dysregulation is when we go below the window of tolerance, and it leads to hypo-arousal. So in this, we start to feel like everything is too much. We get overwhelmed. Our body starts to shut down. We curl up and curl in, and we can't. We lose. Our breathing goes down. Our heartbeat slows down, and we can't move. We feel scared and afraid and fearful. And in this state, which is called the hyper-arousal state, and we feel like our body is going to freeze. So this is the freeze response. So when you are going towards hyperarousal, it's the fight or flight response as we know it. And then when we go into hyperarousal, it's the freeze or fawn response as we know it. So this can, even though our window of tolerance keeps changing, it is within a certain limit. So we can improve or increase the size of our window of tolerance by some practices. As you can see here, it's mentioned like when we can relax ourselves by listening to music, meditating, doing things that we like, going out in nature, and these kind of activities, they expand our window of tolerance. And then trauma and stress can cause our window of tolerance to shrink. So this is important in the sense of when our learners, if you can gauge where our learners are in terms of their window of tolerance, it gives us a better idea of knowing how to what is affecting them, and therefore what steps we can take to either upregulate them or downregulate them, so that they come within the window of tolerance where they are at optimal learning capacity. So this is the threat response, the fight or flight response. I won't go into too much detail. So the fight response is, everything that we can't hear others' point of view. We demand perfection from others. We become dictatorial. We get aggressive and angry. And what this typically we see as in people, we call them, or we say they're narcissists, or they're a sociopath, or they have some conduct disorder, or they have ODD or ADHD and all that. I know those are diagnoses, but they may appear to be like that when they're in the fight or flight response. Yeah, so these are the two kinds of responses. I won't read all the details of them, but it's just that when you're in that response, in the fight response, you feel like you get aggressive and you want to stop the other's point of view, person's point of view. In the flight response, you get scared and you want to run away from the source of distress. And then this is the hyper-arousal response, the freeze or the fawn. So in this response, we see in the freeze response, everything, if you see people spacing out or they're falling asleep, they can't focus, can't concentrate, and they dissociate from what's happening. Brain fog is a good way of describing that. And such people, you feel low energy and feel dead or lifeless. The fawn response is another way of hyperarousal in which we get scared of others and we try to please others. So people pleasing and scared to say what you really think, speaking your mind and trying to flatter others, sucking up to others. So this is one of the hyperarousal fawn responses. So such in that way you can be easily exploited by others. Say yes to everything. So this is also called as the fawn response. So this is a hyperarousal response. So when we are stressed, we face a situation that causes a stress, we shut down or we go into this state. So most of us maybe move between these four kinds of responses or have one or two dominant kind of responses, and you'll recognize it within yourself and you'll recognize it in others too. So just knowing that these are the states that they can go into because of having been traumatized in the past. So what this essentially means is that the brain lacks the capacity to be in the optimal window of tolerance stage or an optimal learning state of readiness. It lacks the capacity to be in that window of tolerance. So it's very easily knocked out of it on the top or below that by stresses from the environment. So the ability to deal with stress is very low. So they're not being bad, or they're not being bold, or they're not being aggressive, or they're not being, any of those things. It's happening because they can't help it. It's the way their brains are wired. Okay, so having a learning mindset is therefore useful, as you can see here. So in response to a challenging information, if they have a learning mindset, so which is if they're able to stay within the window of tolerance, listening, doing, speaking, learning, they all intertwine and happen between each other. They can fluctuate between one and the other, and wholesome learning can take place. Whereas if people have a threat-based mindset, or if they're outside the window of tolerance, and the responses to any challenging information or situation is they fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. So it's kind of essential to recognize this in our learners, so you can bring them into the learning mindset. Now, one of the major ways in which affects our capacity to be within the window of tolerance, or within, in the learning stage, is our early experiences. So there was a study done by Dr. Vincent Felitti. I think it was in the Center for Disease Control in the United States, and in a clinic. It was basically an obesity clinic, and there's a long story. I won't go into that. But what happened is it was first there that it was identified that early childhood experiences of trauma can impact on brain development and everything else from there on. So it doesn't have to be extreme trauma. It can be, small, a set of traumatic incidents. So they developed what is called as the adverse childhood experiences, which is what ACE stands for. And they categorized it into two. One is personal experiences and one is household dysfunction. Within the personal experiences, they had 5 categories of physical abuse, emotional abuse, neglect, emotional, physical neglect, and sexual abuse. And the household or others dysfunctions, they had mental illness in the family, an incarcerated parent or relative, and domestic violence in the house, substance abuse, drugs or alcohol, and divorce or separation, or even separation by death. So if there is a death in the family. So these are the 10 categories they measure people with, and that anybody having any of these 10, or depending on how many of these 10 adverse childhood experiences they've had, it determines how their brains are going to be, brain development is going to be affected, and therefore how their behaviors and how their everything else is going to be affected from there on. So this study is essential in that we can see within here there might be a few that we would have experienced ourselves in our lives, and how that would impact on our future behavior and future brain development. So these are some of the ways in which adverse childhood experiences can affect or have an impact on child development. So they have poor, children with a lot of adverse childhood experiences would have poor relationships and and it's a matter of degree. Somebody could have two adverse experiences and that would knock them off, and somebody would have four, but they would have had a balancing, a healthy relationship with somebody, a regulating relationship with another adult, and and that might have counterbalanced the experience. So these are not these are not prescriptive in that if you have 4 or 5 of these adverse childhood experiences that you're done for, but it does reflect on everything else to a large extent, and these are quite common. So this study was done in the whole population, and they found that 60% of the population have had some adverse childhood experiences, and all these people came from different strata of the society. So whether they were from socially or economically advantaged or disadvantaged sections, it didn't matter. Adverse childhood experiences were spread across all sections of society. So it leads to a lot of impairment in their childhood development. So here are some of them: poor organization, poor relationship skills, poor empathy, and poor emotional regulation, reduced cognitive abilities, so abilities to think and to abilities to understand, to create like goal setting and execution, making choices. And therefore these people who had a lot of ACEs in their childhood, they had unhealthy behavioral adaptation. So these were typically children or people that are aggressive and they're defiant, and they're withdrawal and they're impulsive, this kind of, they manifest as that. This is a graphical representation of how adverse childhood experiences can influence health and well-being throughout the lifespan. So at the very bottom of the pyramid is the experience, the adverse childhood experience, and which leads to the disruption in the brain development. And this can lead to social and cognitive and emotional impairment. So, and such people with social or emotional or cognitive impaired brains can adopt health, high risk behaviors like drinking and substance abuse and self-harm and all that. And this then leads to diseases in life and other social problems, and this can lead to early deaths. So a few studies since the 1980s, when this concept was first developed, have shown that people that have suffered more than 6 adverse childhood experiences in their lives can have a lifespan which is 30% less than their average population. So which is this early death, therefore is really very important. And there are epigenetic mechanisms for transformation of this. So what it means is that the environment in which such people grow up or children grow up can lead to changes in the genes, which then can be transferred on to their other offsprings. Okay, so ACEs and school performance. Again, it leads to, these children don't engage well in school. They're always getting into trouble, and so even as adult learners, they get into trouble. They are, the ones that don't come to all the classes and they don't pay attention when they're there. They're the defiant ones, and they're the ones that don't take instructions easily. They're not interested. They dissociate or disconnect, and they're suspended or expelled from school, and they get into trouble. They have greater difficulty in hearing or listening to what's being taught, and even understanding and making sense of it. So these are some of the effects ACEs can have on education. So how do we help these children? If we understand how to regulate people who are dysregulated, it can give us an opportunity to bring them within their window of tolerance, and that way they can be more present to learning that's happening. So it can be done through regulation, and I'll briefly talk to you about polyvagal theory and what that is, and that's another way of understanding how regulation or dysregulation occurs in our body, in our brains, and then how mindfulness can help in regulating. Okay, so we'll move to the first. This again, from the neurosequential model of education that was developed by Dr. Bruce Perry. He suggested again the 3 R's for reaching the learning brain. So he said, when somebody is dysregulated, there is no point in trying to reason with them. So there's no point in trying to reason with the person that is dysregulated and saying that, oh, it's all okay, and this isn't true, and this is not going to happen. They can't hear us. So the first thing to do is to regulate the person. So I know here the example is given of a child because we're usually talking in terms of children when it comes to regulation or dysregulation. We forget that even as adults we can get dysregulated. So helping the person or the child here, the learner, let's say, to regulate. So to find a way of regulate, to use different strategies or different methods to bring regulation into the body first. So by regulation, we mean regulating the brain and the body. So it's a physical regulation. So this will calm their flight or fight or freeze response. And then using our relationship. So being a teacher with a student, we can use our relationship, and through the relationship, we can bring in, we can attune to the child or the person, and then they are ready for reasoning. So when they're coming out of the dysregulated stage of their bodies, their brains are calm and their bodies are calm now, and then we can reason with them. And then through reason, then we can explain to them what's happened and how it could be and what should be and not be, and all those things that we know are the right things to do. But if we jump in with that in the very beginning when they're dysregulated, it doesn't work. So when you're in an argument or fight with somebody, if you're trying to be telling, if you're bringing across your point, which is very reasonable, they probably won't be able to hear it till they come to a regulated or they're calm, or when they are in a regulated place, and then they are able to reason or hear what you have to say. So this is another now this is coming to the polyvagal theory. This was again a theory that was suggested by Dr. Stephen Porges in the 90s, in which he said he spoke about the vagus nerve that's present in our gut, in our bodies. So we actually have 3 brains in the sense that we know that we have a brain in the head, which is the main the seat of logic and intellect, but there are a lot of nerves coming out of our heart and our gut. There's our digestive systems, and these also communicate with the brains. And we have and they are called brains because they are like neural nerves, the neurons that are connected to these organs, and they directly communicate, and it is beyond our control. We cannot control our digestion or our heart, and they communicate with each other, with the brain and with each other. So let's look at the nervous system. The main nervous system is the central nervous system, where the brain does the job of different things. We all know that. There's also the autonomic nervous system, which was explained in the polyvagal theory. So what happens in this is the autonomic nervous system is the automatic kind of a nervous system, where when we don't have much control, and like I said, it is connected to the spinal cord, which receives most of the information from the environment. And this information that comes in through our bodies, our limbs, our hands, our feet, and our trunk of our body, and these kind of information, they go in through the spinal cord into our brain. So it is divided into the sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic nervous system. So these are the two. The sympathetic nervous system is the fight or flight system, or this is the accelerator system. So this produces movement in our bodies. Now I know this figure is very descriptive, and it tells a lot of what happens when the sympathetic nervous system is in action. But just very briefly, in summary, what the sympathetic nervous system does is it prepares our body for action. So this is the accelerator part of our body system. So in response to something, some environment, to information coming in from the environment, our sympathetic nervous system gets ready to mobilize the body for movement. So anything that it perceives as either a threat or not, if it requires action or movement, that's what the sympathetic nervous system does. The parasympathetic nervous system is the brake system. Now this brakes and stops regulates, so stops the body or slows it down. So throughout the day, these two work in tandem, and we are sometimes accelerated to movement, and then we are slowed down after that. So I'll give you an example. So for example, when we say here somebody so when you hear somebody calling us, so our sympathetic nervous system responds to that stimulus, and it starts to allow us to go to the source of wherever we are called from or wherever we heard the information from. The sympathetic nervous system then comes in to acknowledge that the action is complete and then slow down everything in the body so that we then finish the action. The problem happens when our body gets stuck on one of these two systems. So looking through the polyvagal lens, what this means is, I'll very quickly tell you, it's a theory, but we won't go into the whole thing about what the polyvagal theory is. But basically what she says is that our body has a system where the sympathetic system, which is for movement or acceleration, starts our body into an action. So when you face a threat or when you face a situation, our body reacts to that, and the parasympathetic system then applies the brake. The parasympathetic system applies a brake, and it does two things. It either shuts down the body or it slows down the body, and it brings it or makes it available for social engagement or connection. So that's what this picture says in a nutshell. And it's a bit long-winded and descriptive. And I think we have a few more 10 minutes or 5 minutes left. So I won't go into describing the whole thing. But what this basically means is that we have, whether we are present to learning or not, is determined by the vagus nerve, which is our social connecting system, our social engagement system, it's called. So when our body is at rest and it is alert at the same time, it is available for learning. And this is governed by the vagal nerves in our body. Yeah. So how we know that is we can see it in a relationship when we are talking to a person, when you're engaging with a person. We will know from their facial expressions, the tone of voice, and how they hold their body. We can recognize whether they're in a relaxed state or receptive stage or not. So we can use our own calm to bring another person into calmness. So what that means is if say, for example, in a class, a learner is upset or not, is thrown out of form because of something that's happened, we can, if we are calm, we can use our own bodies or our own state of being to bring calmness to the other. And you can find that in every kind of relationship. So this is explained by the polyvagal theory. Okay, so this is again a graphical description of the same theory. So when we see the wavy line in the center, that is the optimal state of being. So we can be aroused. So we go into the fight or flight mode if we, based on whatever response to an event in the environment, but then it leads to deactivation. So the flight and fight response, the sympathetic response happens here, and then the parasympathetic system jumps in, and then our bodies are deactivated and we come back to normal. And when we are in normal, then we are in social engagement. So this is where engaged social engagement, kind of, we feel safe, we feel connected, we're curious or open, we're compassionate, we're joyful, we're grounded, and then we can engage with other people. So in teacher-learning relationship, we need to have the learner present for our instructions. So when they are in the social engagement state, they can only then receive what we are giving to them. Okay, so these are some emotional regulation strategies. Gosh, I didn't know I had so many slides. I'm sorry. I think I just skipped through them. Sorry, that was my alarm for this presentation. I think so these are some of the strategies. I won't go into them. So there are regulation strategies to increase arousal and to decrease arousal at the same time. So this is for decreasing arousal. There's a host of things, activities you can do, and it's all to do with body and movement, and that's simply because all our feelings and emotions are held in our bodies. So if we can get our bodies moving, and if we can get our bodies to first react, and then the brain follows, and it also gets in a state of. So mindfulness again is one way of regulating regulation, and simply how it does it is because it improves our mental health, it improves attention, it has cognitive benefits, it has emotional benefits, it enhances our social skills, and so on. That's why the practice of mindfulness, and this doesn't have to be meditation on a mat. Mindfulness practices can be every day and every minute nuggets that can be built into our activities with learners. Again, see, these are some of the effects of mindfulness on the brain. I'll fly through this, I'm sorry. And engaging the learning brain, our last section. So how do we engage them? So we can engage them through play, through arts, through hemispheric integration, and through providing a supportive learning environment. So play can, again, even though the picture shows children here, play is essential for all ages and all stages of our lives. Through play, all these benefits that you see listed on the left are available to all of us at any age. So it's not just for kids. It has the greatest impact on younger children or on children and younger people, but it has equal impacts on everyone. So again, you can read through them. Learning through the arts and using creativity. So this is what creativity, like drawing and painting and music and crafts, how they help us to learn, and learning through movement. So this how movement, again, here I've said dance, but any kind of movement, rhythmic movement, can help us to learn by developing coordination and motor skill control and all that. And even role play, how that can help us to learn. Okay, let's say brain. We have two hemispheres, the left and the right. And the left is more logical and analytic, and the right is more creative and artistic. But they can do the function of each other as well. But because they do specific functions of one type on the one hemisphere, when we do something that integrates the two hemispheres, that gives us better opportunities for learning. So our brain dominance shifts between the right and the left hemisphere every 90 minutes approximately, but we can get them to integrate through movement. So example, walking, running, dancing, balancing, swimming. So any movement that involves both sides of the body helps to integrate the two brain hemispheres. So we have the wholesome approach to learning something instead of just one-sided, either the creative or the analytical working at one time. And using some trauma-informed teaching approaches. So if you're aware that there might be trauma in our learners, and then accordingly modifying or preparing material to teach learners, that would include everybody. So using multisensory ways of learning and adopting novel teaching methods. So not just the usual classroom one-way teacher to learner kind of instructions. So if we can adapt other ways of teaching, and creating learning environments that promote resilience, because that's one thing that helps us to resilience helps us to accept or adapt to new situations in a better way, in a more healthy manner. And using play in teaching. So doesn't mean playing, but teaching what we have to teach in a playful manner. But by playful, I mean in a novel or manner, in a manner that stimulates all parts of our brain. So what play does is it engages all the parts of brain at the same time. So using teaching that can do that. UDL is one example where the universal design for learning is built to stimulate different parts of our brain through activities at the same time. And yeah, that's we'll skip this and we'll finish with this last slide. So yeah, I think I went a little over time. My apologies for that. I hope we got through the whole presentation, and I hope you got something out of this. If you have any questions, I'd like to welcome them on anything that we have described or discussed here.
Debanker, thanks so much. That was excellent. Really insightful, fascinating, and yeah, it was really great. And I hope people got something out of it, got some ideas maybe of the learner-teacher interaction relationship and where learners sometimes may be coming from. So thanks a million for that. It was great. I'm going to have a quick look. We've kind of got just a couple of minutes left. I'll have a quick look and see if there are any questions. So Bernie Connell saying, very interesting. Are the slides available to look over? There's a lot of info. Yes, Bernie, I'll send them on to everybody who's registered for today's webinar, and I'll also send on a video link to the, we're recording on the NALA YouTube channel, so you can get a video link there. That could be tomorrow or the day after I get those up to slightly. So yeah, I'll send those on. Teresa, thanks very much, Teresa. The banker Teresa saying that was very interesting. Thank you.
Thank
Bernie
you.
saying great, thanks very much. Norma Radford saying thanks very much, very interesting. So really positive to banker.
Thank you.
Thanks a million. There haven't been any questions pop up, and because it's 12, I think we might just leave it there. Another comment coming in from Kathy O'Mahony saying, thanks, very insightful. Margaret Reardon saying, thank you very much, very interesting. Suzanne Collins saying, thank you to banker, very interesting, important to know. Marie Kane, Kathleen, they're all saying thank you. Very interesting, very informative. So Marie Kane saying, important to know this information for our students. Yeah, that's true. So I'm afraid we're going to have to leave it there. It just leaves me to say thanks very much for tuning in today. I hope you found it interesting. It sounds like you did from the comments. And a big thank you to the banker, who's always calm and interesting and insightful. And you can see from the comments, the banker people really got a lot from it. So as I said, we will forward on the banker's presentation, and in a day or two, we should have the video of this if you want to look back on anything up on the NALA YouTube channel. So thanks very much to everybody. Thanks again to banker, and thanks for tuning in, everybody.
Thank you very much. Yeah.
Bye bye. Up Cavan.
Up Claire. Up the banner.
Too late. You're gone.
Oh, damn.